Everyone is always debating about which diet is best for weight loss, lowering blood sugar, improving artery health. So many different diets. Oh my goodness, how do you choose? There was even a recent study that just came out, published across the globe, where they talked about how the ketogenic diet beats out the Mediterranean and a low fat plant-based diet when it comes to improving your metabolic health and lowering blood sugar and losing weight. But Dr. Dansinger, what are your comments? I mean, they enrolled 55 patients, 42 participants completed it. Where do you stand on the best diet or diets for metabolic health, lowering blood sugar, losing weight, improving artery health?
Kim, thank you. This is a great topic. I'm glad we're going to talk about this one. This whole topic of popular diets and what's the best diet is near and dear to my heart, is how I got my start in research into this. And then it seems like every few weeks or months, there's a new study coming out, sometimes contradicting the last study. And, you know, what we sometimes, even a small study with just a handful of people, will patients or participants will get headlines, and we'll want to put all of this confusion into context, and that's what we'll try to do today as we talk about all the different popular diets and how to think about this. Is it confusion, or are there patterns?
And what is the ultimate best diet, Dr. D?
The one that you can stick to.
I love it. I love it. Okay, here we go.
So there are so many popular diets out there. And for me, it really all started over 25 years ago when the Eat Right for Your Blood Type diet by Dr. Peter D'Adamo came out, and it was a bestseller for months and months. And the idea was that if you pick an eating strategy according to your blood type, and that really sparked the imagination, especially of the American public, is to created a field called dietary personalization. And everywhere you look, there's a different diet with different claims. For many people, this just creates all sorts of confusion. And while for others, it really creates an opportunity to find the perfect diet. So it's up to you and your healthcare team to weigh the pros and cons of each different diet and decide if a formal plan is right for you. And for some people, they don't do well with a formal set of rules, and they just do it more casually. But for others, it's really helpful to have a formal set of rules that they're going to follow. And so the beauty of this is there's no one best approach for everyone. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
no one
And
best approach.
yeah, so, I want to live in a world where we celebrate, diversity and what makes each of us unique. And so in the old days, there used to be this notion that there's one best diet for everyone. And that's an outdated idea now. And that's based on the science. The science shows very clearly that there are many good eating strategies, but they each have strengths and drawbacks. And so the trick is finding the best one for you based on your specific food preferences and medical situation and health goals. So I like to think of this, all this diversity, like colors in the rainbow. There is no science cannot tell you what's the best color in the rainbow, but my favorite color happens to be purple, but that's not everyone else's favorite color. And so for you as an individual, you might have a right best favorite eating style or type of music that you like or favorite color, and but there's no best for everyone, and that's the kind of world I want to live in anyway. So I'm happy that the science shows that there's lots of choices.
But I think the key is that if you're going to do the diet, yes, it's the one you stick to, but also the one that you're not going to use to go to the extreme. For example, on the ketogenic diet, there are Facebook groups that are out there all about the ketogenic diet, and people are loading their plates with sausage and bacon, lots and lots of bacon. And then, conversely, on the plant-based side, they're just eating tons and tons of processed foods and lots of carbs. And, you have to pick everything with a grain of salt, literally, and make sure you're making the healthiest choices that fit within each diet, right?
Yeah, you make a very good point about it. So we'll talk more about that shortly. The When we think about these hundreds of thousands of diet books, it used to be you could go into the bookstore and see a shelf loaded down with not just a shelf, a whole bookcase loaded up with popular diets. Now you look at it online, and if you just go to, an online bookseller and look at all the different, diet books, there's thousands and thousands and thousands, but there's a pattern to them. Some warn about fats, some warn about carbs, and everything in between. And so I call this the popular diet spectrum. And over 20 years ago, I was able to publish research trying to compare different popular diets. So this was in association with Tufts Medical School, and I worked with a team, and we randomly assigned 160 people who had heart disease risk factors like diabetes or high blood pressure or high cholesterol to one of four eating strategies, either the low carb, the moderate fat, or the low fat eating plan. And what we found in that research study, which over the course of a year, when we monitored weight and blood results, that it was a four-way tie. All four of those eating strategies produced similar degrees of weight loss and heart disease risk factor improvements, but all of those eating plans were equally difficult to stick to. But the closer you stuck to the plan, the better your weight loss and blood test improvement. And so our conclusion was that it's the adherence level rather than the diet type that is much more important in long-term results.
Yeah, I would imagine with a study with 160 plus patients that it would be tough for anyone to be that adherent to one particular diet strategy. That had to have taken a lot of education per patient.
Yes, I had the privilege of working with a terrific dietitian to lead the classes myself. And so this other dietitian and I met in small groups of 10 participants at a time to train them to follow whichever eating strategy they were um, assigned to. And so one day I would be telling people, you can eat all the fat you want, but limit your carbs. And then the next day I might say, you can eat all the carbs you want, but limit your fats. And, to say such contradictory things with such equal levels of enthusiasm was kind of surreal. So. So let's learn a little bit more about these different four different um, categories of eating strategies. So even though there's thousands and thousands of eating strategies, almost all of them fall neatly into one of these four categories. And so there's the low carb diets. These are very low carb diets. So Atkins, keto. Other examples would be protein power or the Dukan diet. Then there's the moderate carb diets. Some of the most famous ones are the Zone diet or the South Beach diet or the Paleo diet, or there was one called Sugar Busters. Suzanne Summers also had a moderate carb eating strategy that was popular for a while. Then there's the moderate fat diets. These are the ones that are most closely aligned with standard dietary advice from the medical establishment, like the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, the DASH diet, Mediterranean diet would fall into this, Weight Watchers. And then you've got your very low fat diets like Pritikin and Ornish, very low fat vegan eating plans, the Japanese diet would fall into this. And so These are the almost all the eating plans can fall into one of these, but they all have pluses and minuses. So when it comes to the low carbohydrate diets, the they all emphasize that they all focus on sugar and the fact that starchy foods rapidly turn to sugar in the body, and those raise the level of sugar and insulin in the blood, and high insulin levels promote fat storage rather than fat burning. And these starchy foods, bread, cereal, rice, pasta, too much fruit, starchy vegetables, are dramatically reduced in these very low carb eating strategies, and the fats and the proteins are much higher. And so it's mostly about meat, cheese, and eggs, and salad vegetables, and maybe small amounts of fruit like berries, for example. Um, these eating plans are satiating. They reduce overall hunger and calories. The body shifts from burning to burning fat for fuel, and it does produce weight loss. So the research shows that these low carb eating plans work at least as well as any other strategy for reducing body fat. Almost every research study that compares a keto style eating plan to others, it's either a tie or the low carb eating strategy produces more weight loss, and that has health benefits.
Just stay away from the bacon. Don't fill your plate with eggs and bacon and sausage.
Yeah, there's plenty of low carb foods that aren't loaded with animal fat, and so I do favor the low carb eating strategies that focus on fish and poultry and um,
You
lean
like
meat.
tofu and
Sure.
tempeh.
Yeah. So there's a way to do eating plans with without going overboard on the saturated fat. So the strengths of low carb diets are that it reduces body fat at least as well as any other eating strategy, and it improves blood sugar and insulin very effectively. It improves high blood pressure, so do other eating plans though, and it improves triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, and LDL particle size probably better than any other eating strategy does. So it's really the most effective, I think, for for improving those types of blood fats, but it's the least effective for lowering LDL cholesterol, especially in people who aren't losing a lot of weight or people who are eating a lot of animal fat from meat and dairy. Also, we don't know for certain how these low carb diets affect the cholesterol plaque buildup in the heart. It's a real shame that we don't have good, solid,
Yeah.
randomized control evidence looking at heart attack rates or even cholesterol buildup in the arteries. And so there's some hints at that, but really not enough good solid research data, which is a real shame. A common side effect of a low carb diet is constipation. Also, it has the highest carbon footprint, and um, some find it too extreme. A lot of people find it just too extreme. They get tired of meat, cheese, and eggs, or they just find it just too different from a mainstream eating style, and then they tire of it and don't get back on track.
Yeah, I would wonder because I never really put the two and two together before, but I would have to imagine that someone who has a cholesterol reabsorption issue, this would not be the right diet for them because if you say it's a little less effective for lowering LDL cholesterol. Probably one of the reasons is the high constipation rates, that they're not able to excrete the LDL cholesterol in a timely fashion. And so it gets reabsorbed, right?
Yeah, Kim, you make an important point. And what the research shows is that when people are losing weight, the LDL goes down in about 2 out of 3 people, but it goes up in 1 out of 3. And that's probably the worst track record. And in me personally, when I went on a keto diet, My LDL was terrible. I mean, it was really alarming what happened to me. And as we've talked about before, I happen to be an overabsorber. And so if you are an overabsorber, this is not necessarily a good fit for your situation.
A moderate carbohydrate diets.
Yeah, I like these a lot. They're the most common ones I use with my patients. They're not for everyone, but we talked about how famous examples include the South Beach and the Zone or Paleo. These plans highlight concerns about sugar, starch, and grains and excess, but also excess animal fat. And they focus on lots of low starch vegetables, moderate amounts of fruits. They include seeds, healthy proteins like seafood, and other lean proteins. Some of them have different viewpoints about high fiber foods like legumes, for example. So the particular details of these plans can vary a little bit when it comes to high starch foods that have lots of fiber, like popcorn or bananas or oatmeal, for example. The paleo diet, for example, mimics the natural human diet before humanity discovered farming. And so it really focuses on vegetables, fruits, nuts, meats, eggs, and seafood and avoids things that did not exist in the human diet 10,000 years ago. That includes all of the grains. There was no dairy or legumes until humanity invented farming. So research shows that close adherence to any of these moderate carb eating strategies does improve body fat and blood sugar and blood pressure and cardiovascular risk factor tests. And also, unlike the keto diets, which almost always do include increased saturated fat, this one doesn't, and or this category doesn't. And I can't really think of any significant health concerns with a moderate carbohydrate approach.
And we didn't separate into a whole new slide on the benefits and drawbacks because it seems pretty cut and dried.
Agreed. What about moderate fat diets? So as I mentioned earlier, these fit with standard medical advice. The Mediterranean diet is has been hot for the past decade, and it always wins the U.S. News and World Report Best Diet Survey, for example. Weight Watchers is another great example, the American Diabetes Association. These plans replace fats, especially animal fat from meat and dairy, with whole grains and legumes, fruits and vegetables. Portion size becomes increasingly important with this eating strategy. And so you definitely focus on calories. These eating strategies, especially a Mediterranean diet, focuses on healthy fats from olive oil, nuts, avocados, and seafood. Um, the Mediterranean diet includes olive oil and wine, and it strongly emphasizes small portions and minimal snacking. Research shows these diets improve all health indicators, including lifespan, but a major criticism is that most people aren't strict enough when trying to follow them. And so these eating plans embrace a much broader range of foods than any others. And if you're not careful, you can trick yourself or fool yourself into eating just about anything and saying that it's on this plan as long as it's in moderation. And so you have to be strict enough in order to make these work for weight loss. And this most recent research study that's in the news this week that you mentioned at the beginning, Kim, is an example of a Mediterranean diet not being great for weight loss, even if it can improve cardiovascular risk factors. I find moderate fat diets very good for weight loss, but only if they're followed very strictly.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to pour the olive oil on, or you're going to drink a couple of glasses of wine every night, you're definitely not going to be losing weight. especially. But with the olive oil, I do want to emphasize that it's not just any olive oil. You need to make sure it is first or early harvest, hand picked, cold pressed, extra virgin olive oil. Best is at your farmer's market if you can. We also always talk about, I think it's Veronica Foods EV olive oil.com, and you can find a store near you. That's not just me saying it. One of their oils was actually voted the healthiest in the world. They lay out their polyphenols, their oleocanthols, and whatever other antioxidants, the amount of fat, different kinds of fats, monosaturated fats, and whatever that are in each oil. And you can get education from the store owners on what might be right for your situation. So do make sure that you choose the right olive oil and make sure it is in moderation. Low fat diets.
Yeah. So, unlike the moderate fat diets that we just mentioned, where about 30% of the calories are coming from fat, the low fat diets aim for closer to 20% fat, maybe as low as 15% fat. And so you really focus on reducing the amount of fat of all sorts because fats have a lot of calories in them. And so, famous examples of these low fat eating strategies are the Pritikin diet, the Ornish diet, low fat vegan diets, Japanese diets. And the way to make these eating plans effective is counting the grams per day of fats, just like the opposite extreme. When you're on a low carb diet, you got to count the carbs. On a low fat diet, you really need to count the grams of carbs by doing food logging. And a nice thing about a low fat eating strategy is that's so high in fiber, which is something we talked about at length previously. So it has the most fiber. So those come from vegetables, legumes, fruits, and whole grains. And then protein foods include soy, egg whites, non-fat dairy, and beans, of course. And there are some low-fat eating styles that include low-fat seafood and poultry breast in moderation, although most of them are vegetarian. And the research does show that these low-fat eating plans improve obesity and diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular risk. It lowers LDL cholesterol the best compared to the other strategies, although it's least effective for improving HDL, triglycerides, and LDL particle size. So it's the opposite of what we saw with the low carb diets, which are good for improving those. The low fat diets are the least effective. And so there's this trade-off. Are you trying to improve your LDL, or are you trying to improve the non-LDL types of lipids? And so that's another thing to keep in mind. When I was really focused on personalizing the eating strategies for people based on their blood testing, I would always look at the different types of lipid abnormalities that we're trying to fix as we consider the optimal eating strategy. So all of these plans require focus on, quantities, and they all have pros and cons. So the low carb plan is the best for fat loss and insulin resistance. Watch out for constipation and LDL elevations from saturated fat. The moderate carb eating plan is really good for flexibility and flexible targeting of sugar and starch reduction. The moderate fat plan is really good for people who want something that's not extremist, that fits in to a broad range of food preferences. We have good research data showing that it can improve, heart attack rates and lifespan. But be careful that you're doing it strictly enough and rather than too casually. You don't want a bunch of refined starch in there thinking that that's part of the eating plan. And then the low fat eating plans are best for lowering LDL cholesterol, but watch out for the other lipids, which can actually worsen in the absence of sufficient weight loss.
Whoops.
So, putting it all together, nutrition research strongly supports the idea of many effective eating strategies. My study over 20 years ago really was the first big one that I think showed four different eating strategies in a four-way tie. There have been many bigger and better ones, and the research is very clear. There's really no one best for everyone, but there's clearly drawbacks to each of them, and all of them are difficult to follow. Finding a good fit for your health goals, medical situation, food preferences is about finding an approach you can stick with long term. So, no matter what you do, it does require commitment, focus, persistence, and advanced planning. That's how I spend all my work hours with patients, is helping them focus on what it takes to follow these plans consistently. And then you want it to become an automatic part of everyday life. And some people even switch between different eating strategies. I call this dating the diets rather than marrying one. And so I've had patients every 4 months or 3 months change with the seasons and do something different so they can avoid monotony and take advantage of seasonal variations in the produce, and that can work too. So there's different strokes for different folks. So there's no one best for everyone. There's lots of good plans that work. Adherence matters more than anything else. Each style has strengths and drawbacks. Know them before you choose. And most importantly, don't necessarily rely only on yourself. Work with your healthcare team, especially a dietitian if possible, to match the right eating strategy to your life so you can stick with it long term.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next up is Module 7, food substitutions. You're going to absolutely love that section. So make sure you tune in for the next module. Do like the video, subscribe to our channel, and always check under our live events for the next module for our Patty's Plate, our food orientation for PAD. Thank you so much, Dr. Dansinger. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing your wealth of information, and congratulations on the fact that your study still holds true today. Benefits and drawbacks, the best diet for you is the best one that you're going to stick with.